Marry me for 90 days, and your mother gets the surgery tomorrow morning." The words hit Claire Bennett harder than the freezing October rain pouring across the hospital parking lot. For a second, she honestly thought the man standing in front of her had to be insane. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her worn gray hoodie onto her trembling hands as she stared at him beneath the harsh white glow of the emergency room lights. The black Rolls-Royce parked behind him looked unreal against the storm, polished and silent like something from another world. And the man beside it looked even more unreal. Tall, sharp jawline, dark wool coat worth more than her car, steel gray eyes that didn't seem to blink enough. Ethan Calloway. Even Claire recognized the name. Everybody in Manhattan recognized the name. Billionaire hotel CEO. Business magazines called him the king of luxury hospitality. The internet called him cold, ruthless, impossible to impress. And right now, he was standing in front of her holding out a silver fountain pen and a stack of papers like he was offering her a part-time job instead of a marriage contract. Claire let out a disbelieving laugh, shaking her head slowly. "You've got the wrong person." Ethan didn't smile. "No. I have exactly the right person." Thunder rolled somewhere over the city skyline. Claire hugged her arms tighter around herself, trying to stop shivering. She had been awake for almost 21 hours straight. Her waitress shift at Rosie's Diner had ended at 2 a.m., and she'd spent the rest of the night beside her mother's hospital bed listening to machines hum softly in the dark. Her mom's surgery deposit was due by noon tomorrow. $280,000. Claire had exactly $412 in her checking account. Her landlord had already taped a red eviction notice to her apartment door yesterday morning. And now this stranger was offering her millions to become his fake wife. It sounded like the setup to a scam, except scammers didn't usually arrive in custom Italian shoes during thunderstorms. Ethan glanced toward the hospital entrance where people hurried through the rain with umbrellas and coffee cups. "We don't have much time." Claire stared at him. "You can't just walk up to someone and ask them to marry you." "I can if the alternative is watching your mother die waiting for surgery." The sentence sliced through her chest so cleanly she stopped breathing for a second. Ethan's expression didn't change. That almost made it worse. He said devastating things the same way most people commented on the weather. Calm, controlled, precise. Claire swallowed hard. "How do you know about my mom?" "Because when I make important decisions, I do research." Her stomach tightened. "You investigated me?" "Yes." "That's creepy." "Probably." Another crack of thunder echoed overhead. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Rain hammered against the pavement around them. Cars splashed through puddles near the emergency entrance. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed through the city night. Claire looked down at the papers in Ethan's hand. The top page had her full name typed neatly across the contract. Claire Marie Bennett. She suddenly felt dizzy. "Why me?" she whispered. Ethan finally looked away from her. His jaw flexed once. "Because my fiancé left me 48 hours before our engagement announcement." Claire blinked. "What?" "She left with a tech billionaire from San Francisco." His voice remained perfectly flat. "Unfortunately, our merger with the Whitmore Family Investment Group still requires me to appear married for 90 days. Claire stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was all a joke. None came. "So you're replacing your fiancé with a random waitress from Brooklyn?" "You're not random." Ethan's eyes met hers again. "You have no criminal record. No social scandals. No public social media presence. You work hard. You've never sold information to tabloids. And according to your former manager at St. Agnes Cafe, you once worked a double shift after breaking your wrist because another waitress needed to take care of her son." Claire felt heat rush into her face despite the cold rain. "You talked to Donna?" "I talked to everyone." That somehow sounded less reassuring than he probably intended. Claire looked toward the hospital windows glowing above them. Somewhere inside that building, her mother was asleep under thin white blankets with 4 tubes in her arms. Earlier tonight, her mother had smiled weakly and apologized for being such an expensive patient. Claire had gone into the bathroom afterward and cried quietly into paper towels because she didn't know what else to do anymore. She was tired. Tired in a way that settled deep into the bones. Tired of overdue notices. Tired of pretending things would magically work out. Tired of hearing doctors say words like urgent and time-sensitive. Ethan stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice. 90 days. Public appearances only. You'll live in my penthouse during the arrangement. My legal team handles everything else. Claire laughed again, but this time it sounded shaky. You make it sound like booking a hotel suite. It's simpler if emotions stay out of it. The sentence lingered strangely between them. Claire looked at him more carefully then. Really looked at him. Most billionaires on television smiled too much. Ethan didn't smile at all. His eyes looked exhausted beneath the sharp confidence, like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Rain clung to his dark hair. He looked expensive and lonely at the same time. Somehow that combination made her chest ache unexpectedly. She hated that. And if I say no? She asked quietly. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. Then I walk away. Just like that. Yes. Claire nodded slowly, though disappointment curled painfully inside her. Of course he'd walk away. Men like Ethan Calloway always walked away clean. They had money to protect them from consequences. Meanwhile, people like Claire spent months deciding whether they could afford blueberries at the grocery store. Ethan extended the pen toward her again. But if you say yes, your mother's surgery gets approved tonight. Claire stared at the silver pen in his hand. Her fingers tightened around the sleeve of her hoodie. Somewhere deep inside herself, she felt pride screaming at her not to do this. But pride didn't pay hospital bills. Pride didn't stop cancer treatments. Pride didn't save mothers. Her eyes burned suddenly. She looked away fast before he noticed. What happens after 90 days? She whispered. Ethan answered immediately. We divorce quietly. You receive $5 million. Full confidentiality. No future obligations. $5 million. The number didn't even sound real. Claire thought about her tiny apartment with the leaking ceiling. About eating ramen noodles 4 nights in a row last week. About counting quarters for laundromat dryers. $5 million could erase every fear she'd carried since she was 19 years old. But somehow the thing terrifying her most wasn't the contract. It was Ethan himself. Because beneath the coldness, beneath the billion-dollar reputation and perfectly tailored coat, there was something else in his eyes. Something broken. And Claire suddenly had the horrible feeling that saying yes to this man might change her life in ways neither of them expected. Ethan checked his watch once. Claire. His voice softened slightly for the first time all night. I need an answer. Rain dripped from her hair onto the contract. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the traffic anymore. Then slowly, almost against her own instincts, Claire Bennett reached for the pen. The moment Claire's fingers closed around the silver pen, Ethan Calloway slid the contract beneath the shelter of the hospital awning so the rain would not smear the ink. Her hand trembled slightly as she stared at the final page. The words looked cold and impossibly official beneath the white parking lot lights. Temporary marital agreement. 90 days. Public appearances mandatory. Full confidentiality required. $5 million upon completion. Claire swallowed hard. Somewhere inside the hospital, a machine was probably still beeping beside her mother's bed while she stood outside agreeing to marry a man she had known for less than 10 minutes. Her entire life suddenly felt unreal. Ethan watched her silently. He did not pressure her again. Somehow that silence made the moment even heavier. Claire finally signed her name in careful cursive letters. Claire Marie Bennett. The ink looked tiny against the massive decision she had just made. Ethan took the papers back calmly, like billion-dollar contracts and hospital parking lots happened every day for him. Then he removed his phone from his coat pocket and made a call immediately. Transfer the funds to St. Vincent's surgical department now, he said simply. A short pause. Tonight. Claire stared at him. That is it. Ethan slipped the phone away. Your mother's surgery will be scheduled by morning. Claire felt her knees weaken slightly. For the first time in weeks, the crushing pressure inside her chest loosened enough for her to breathe. She pressed a shaking hand against her mouth and looked away fast, embarrassed by the tears suddenly burning her eyes. Ethan noticed anyway. Of course he noticed. Men like Ethan probably noticed everything. But he did not mention it. Instead, he removed his dark wool coat and draped it carefully over her shoulders. The warmth startled her instantly. It smelled faintly like cedarwood, inexpensive cologne. Safe. Rich. Untouchable. Claire almost handed it back automatically. Nobody had wrapped something warm around her shoulders in a very long time. You are freezing, Ethan said quietly. Claire looked down at the oversized coat hanging around her thin frame. I am okay. No, Ethan replied. You are trying very hard to look okay. The sentence hit unexpectedly hard. Claire lowered her eyes before he could see how much it affected her. Across the parking lot, headlights swept through puddles as another car pulled into the emergency entrance. New York moved endlessly around them. Sirens, traffic, rain bouncing against concrete. Yet somehow the world beneath the hospital awning felt strangely still. Ethan checked his watch again. My driver will take you home tonight. Claire immediately shook her head. No. Ethan looked mildly surprised. No. I need to stay with my mom. You have not slept. I am still staying. Something flickered briefly across Ethan's face then. Respect maybe. Or recognition. Claire could not tell. He nodded once. Fine. Another awkward silence settled between them. Claire realized suddenly that she had absolutely no idea how fake marriages actually worked. Were they supposed to shake hands? Hug? Pretend to be in love immediately? Her stomach twisted nervously. Ethan seemed equally uncertain for a moment, though he hid it better. Tomorrow morning, he said finally, my assistant will bring clothing and basic necessities to your apartment. Claire blinked. My apartment? You will move into my penthouse tomorrow evening. The words sounded ridiculous out loud. Claire almost laughed again. Her entire apartment could probably fit inside one of his closets. You already planned all this before talking to me? Yes. What if I said no? Ethan's mouth moved slightly, almost becoming a smile before disappearing again. I was hoping desperation would make you practical. Claire folded her arms tightly beneath the coat. That is a terrible thing to say to someone. Probably. He said it so calmly that she almost smiled despite herself. Almost. Rain continued falling steadily beyond the awning. Ethan glanced toward the hospital entrance again before looking back at her. There is one more thing. Claire immediately tensed. What? Publicly. This marriage needs to appear believable. Her stomach dropped. Believable how? Ethan held her gaze evenly. Photographs. Events. Dinners. Public appearances. Nothing inappropriate. But people need to think we are genuinely together. Claire nodded slowly, though heat crept into her face anyway. She had spent the last 5 years balancing diner trays and overdue bills. Suddenly pretending to be the billionaire girlfriend America would obsess over felt terrifying beyond words. Ethan studied her expression carefully. You can still walk away. Claire looked toward the glowing hospital windows again. Then she thought about her mother smiling weakly through pain medication earlier tonight and whispering, I am sorry I became such a burden. No, she could not walk away now. I signed the contract, she said softly. Ethan gave a small nod. Then tomorrow your life changes. He had no idea how frightening that sentence sounded to someone like her. Claire glanced down at her old sneakers, soaked from rainwater. One lace was frayed badly near the bottom. She suddenly imagined stepping into one of Ethan's luxury hotels dressed exactly like this, and nearly died from embarrassment. There is something you should know, she admitted quietly. Ethan waited. Claire hesitated. Pride tasted bitter in her throat. I am behind on rent. Ethan's expression did not change. Okay. Like, really behind. Claire. His voice remained calm. I already know. Of course he did. That somehow made humiliation crawl hotter beneath her skin. Right, she muttered softly. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his watch before speaking again. You will not need to worry about money anymore. Claire almost laughed at how impossible that sounded. People who grew up poor never truly stopped worrying about money. Even if they won the lottery, they still checked grocery prices automatically, still folded receipts carefully, still feared opening bills. Ethan's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He glanced down at the screen, and for the first time all night, genuine irritation crossed his face. What? He answered coldly. Claire looked away awkwardly while he listened. His jaw tightened slightly. Tell the board I do not care what the media says tonight. Another pause. No. Cancel tomorrow's interview. His voice turned sharper. I said cancel it. He ended the call abruptly. Claire stared at him carefully. Beneath the expensive coat and controlled posture, tension practically radiated off him. Bad night? She asked quietly before thinking better of it. Ethan looked at her for a moment, almost surprised by the question. Then he glanced toward the rain. My fiancée announced her relationship with another man on live television 3 hours ago. Claire winced softly. Oh, our engagement was supposed to be announced next week. That is brutal. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh under his breath. That is Manhattan. Something about the exhaustion in his voice softened Claire unexpectedly. For the first time since meeting him, He sounded less like a billionaire CEO and more like a normal man standing in the rain after getting his heart broken. The realization unsettled her more than his money did, because broken people were dangerous in quieter ways. Ethan suddenly looked back at her. "Why did you stay?" Claire frowned slightly. "What?" "Most people would have run the moment I approached them tonight." She hesitated before answering honestly. "Because my mom needs surgery." Ethan shook his head once. "No, I mean before that." Claire looked confused. Ethan's voice lowered slightly. "You looked exhausted when I first saw you walking out here. But you still stopped to help an elderly woman with her umbrella in the lobby." Claire blinked. "You saw that?" "I see everything." The words should have sounded arrogant. Instead, they sounded lonely. Claire stared at him beneath the hospital lights while rain poured endlessly around them. For the first time all night, the contract suddenly felt less terrifying than the man standing beside her. Because Ethan Calloway looked like someone who had spent years surrounded by people, yet trusted absolutely nobody. And somehow, against all logic, Claire had just agreed to become the closest person in his life. Claire barely slept that night. The stiff plastic chair beside her mother's hospital bed dug painfully into her back, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan Calloway standing in the rain holding out that impossible contract. At 5:12 in the morning, a nurse quietly entered the room carrying a clipboard and a small smile. "Good news," she whispered gently. "Your mother's surgery was fully approved overnight." Claire felt her chest tighten instantly. "Approved?" The nurse nodded. Everything was paid in full. Claire looked toward her sleeping mother, whose pale face seemed softer for the first time in weeks beneath the glow of the monitor lights. Tears burned suddenly behind Claire's eyes again. Ethan had actually done it. He had not disappeared. He had not changed his mind. Somewhere between midnight and sunrise, a billionaire stranger had completely altered the direction of her life. Her phone buzzed softly in her lap. Unknown number. Claire hesitated before answering. "Hello." "Good morning, Claire." Ethan's voice was calm and smooth even at dawn. "I hope your mother is resting." Claire lowered her voice instinctively. "The surgery got approved." "Yes." The simple answer somehow made her emotional all over again. She swallowed hard. "Thank you." A brief silence followed. Then Ethan spoke again. "My assistant will arrive at your apartment in 45 minutes. Claire blinked. 45? Wait, what? "You will need clothing for this evening." Claire sat upright in panic. "This evening? There is a charity gala at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. We need to appear together publicly before rumors spread about Vanessa." Claire nearly choked on air. "Tonight?" "Yes." "Ethan, I do not even own a dress without ketchup stains." She heard the faintest pause on the line. Then unexpectedly, Ethan let out a quiet laugh beneath his breath. It was small, barely there, but it completely transformed his voice for a second. Warmer, younger somehow. Claire froze slightly at the sound. "That is why my assistant is coming," he said. "Relax. Relax." "Right." Claire glanced down at her faded jeans and diner sneakers and almost laughed hysterically. Nothing about this situation was remotely relaxing. "I have work tonight," she muttered weakly. "You quit yesterday." Claire frowned. "What?" "Rosie's Diner received your resignation notice this morning." Her eyes widened. "You resigned for me? You cannot serve pancakes during the day and attend Manhattan galas at night." Claire stared at the hospital floor in disbelief. "You really do control everything, do you not?" Ethan's voice remained calm. "Only the things that matter." Before Claire could answer, he added quietly, "Eat something this morning." Then the call ended. Claire lowered the phone slowly. Somehow that final sentence unsettled her most of all. Eat something. Nobody had reminded her to eat in years. Not since her mother got sick. Around 7 that morning, her mother finally woke up. Martha Bennett blinked slowly beneath the soft hospital lights before smiling weakly at her daughter. "You stayed all night again." Claire forced a smile. "I am hard to get rid of." Martha studied her carefully for a second. "Something happened. Mothers always knew." Claire looked down at her hands nervously. "Mom." Martha's expression softened instantly. "Claire, what is it?" Claire had rehearsed explanations in her head all night, but suddenly every version sounded insane out loud. "Hi, Mom. I married a billionaire in a parking lot during a thunderstorm." Finally, she whispered, "Your surgery got approved because someone helped us." Martha frowned slightly. "Who?" Claire hesitated. "A man named Ethan Calloway." Silence. Then Martha's eyes widened in complete confusion. "The hotel billionaire?" "Yeah." Claire Bennett. Her mother slowly pushed herself upright against the pillows. Why would a billionaire help us? Claire looked away immediately. It is complicated. Martha narrowed her eyes with terrifying maternal accuracy. How complicated? Claire inhaled shakily. We are getting married. Complete silence filled the hospital room. Even the heart monitors suddenly sounded louder. Martha stared at her daughter for several long seconds. You hit your head recently, did you not? Claire almost laughed from sheer panic. I know how it sounds. Please tell me this man is not 80 years old. Mom, I am serious. He is 38. Martha blinked again. Handsome, Claire groaned softly. Mom, if my daughter is marrying a billionaire stranger, I deserve details. Despite herself, Claire smiled for the first time all morning. Martha reached for her hand gently. Honey, her voice softened. What is really going on? Claire looked down at their joined hands. Then quietly, she explained everything. The contract, the fake marriage, the gala, the 90 days. By the time she finished, Martha looked both horrified and strangely emotional. You are doing this for me, she whispered. Claire immediately shook her head. No, but the lies sounded weak even to herself. Martha squeezed her hand tighter. Claire Marie Bennett, you have spent your whole life trying to save everybody. Tears burned suddenly in Claire's eyes again. I just do not know what else to do anymore. Her mother looked at her carefully for a long moment. Then softly, she asked, and what happens if you fall in love with him? Claire let out a startled laugh. Mom, I am serious. He does not even smile. Sometimes those are the dangerous ones. Claire rolled her eyes, but deep inside, something uncomfortable shifted slightly. Because despite Ethan's coldness, despite the contract and impossible wealth and terrifying control, there had been moments last night where she caught glimpses of something else beneath him. Loneliness, exhaustion, sadness he tried very hard to bury. Before Claire could think further, a sharp knock sounded against the hospital room door. Then a woman stepped inside wearing cream-colored heels and carrying 2 garment bags. Miss Bennett. The woman smiled professionally. I am Olivia. Mr. Calloway sent me. Claire immediately felt underdressed just existing near her. Olivia looked polished in the effortless Manhattan way Claire had only ever seen in luxury store advertisements. That was fast, Claire muttered. Olivia glanced at her tablet politely. Mr. Calloway dislikes delays. Of course he did not. Olivia placed the garment bags carefully across the visitor chair before revealing boxes filled with cosmetics, shoes, jewelry, and folded designer clothing. Martha's eyes widened dramatically from the hospital bed. Oh my God, Claire felt faint. This is too much. Olivia smiled slightly. This is only the daytime selection. Claire looked horrified. There is more. Much more. Martha suddenly looked far too entertained by all of this. Claire, sweetheart, she whispered loudly. Do not ruin this by panicking. Claire stared at her own mother in betrayal. Olivia opened one of the garment bags carefully, revealing an elegant cream-colored dress that looked softer than anything Claire had ever touched. She hesitated before brushing her fingertips lightly against the fabric. This probably costs more than my car, she whispered. Olivia checked her tablet calmly. Significantly more. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Somewhere out there in Manhattan, Ethan Calloway was probably already halfway through a billion-dollar business meeting while completely restructuring her entire life before breakfast. And terrifyingly enough, Claire was beginning to realize there might be no going back anymore. By 6 o'clock that evening, Claire Bennett no longer recognized the woman staring back at her from the mirror. Soft waves framed her blonde hair instead of the rushed ponytail she usually wore at the diner. Her makeup was elegant and subtle, making her blue eyes appear brighter beneath the warm vanity lights inside the luxury suite Olivia had brought her to earlier that afternoon. The cream-colored dress fit perfectly against her figure, flowing gently to the floor like something from an old Hollywood movie. Even the heels felt unreal. Everything about her looked expensive now. Polished, delicate, like she belonged in a world that had never once opened its doors for people like her. Claire touched the edge of the marble vanity nervously. I look like someone who would judge me in an elevator. Olivia laughed softly while fastening a diamond bracelet around Claire's wrist. That means the transformation worked. Claire stared at the jewelry in horror. I cannot wear this. You absolutely can. What if I lose it? Then Mr. Calloway buys another one. Claire swallowed hard. Rich people really live differently. Olivia stepped back with a satisfied nod. You are beautiful. The compliment hit harder than Claire expected. For years, survival had become more important than beauty. Exhaustion became part of her face. Stress became part of her body. Somewhere between overdue rent notices and hospital visits, she had stopped seeing herself as a woman worth noticing. Tonight felt strange, like stepping briefly into someone else's life. A knock sounded against the suite door. Olivia smiled immediately. Right on time. Claire's stomach tightened. Ethan. Olivia opened the door smoothly, and suddenly the air inside the room changed. Ethan Calloway stepped inside wearing a black tuxedo, so perfectly tailored it looked dangerous. His dark hair was neatly styled now, and the cold silver watch on his wrist probably cost more than Claire's entire apartment building. Yet despite the elegance, his expression remained unreadable as always. Calm, controlled, distant, until his eyes landed on Claire. Then he stopped moving completely. Silence stretched across the room for one long heartbeat. Claire suddenly became painfully aware of every inch of exposed skin above the neckline of the dress. Ethan stared at her quietly, almost like he forgot Olivia was still standing there. Something shifted subtly in his expression. Not dramatic, not obvious, but softer somehow, warmer. Claire's pulse stumbled unexpectedly. Olivia glanced between them with visible satisfaction. Well, she announced lightly, my work here is done. She grabbed her tablet and slipped out of the room before Claire could beg her not to leave. Suddenly, it was just the two of them. The silence became awkward almost instantly. Ethan cleared his throat softly. You look, he stopped. Claire waited nervously. Ethan's gaze moved briefly across her dress before returning to her eyes. Beautiful. The word came out quieter than she expected. More honest, too. Heat rushed immediately into Claire's cheeks. Thank you. Ethan looked away first, adjusting the cuff of his jacket slightly. Claire noticed then that he seemed tense tonight. More tense than yesterday. You okay? She asked carefully. Ethan's jaw tightened faintly. The press already knows I am bringing someone new tonight. Claire's stomach dropped. Already. Vanessa has influential friends in media. He glanced toward her again. There will be cameras outside. Claire tried not to panic visibly. Cameras. Right. Of course there would be cameras. People like Ethan did not walk through normal life unnoticed. What exactly do I have to do? She asked quietly. Ethan stepped closer, though he still kept a respectful distance between them. Stay beside me. Smile occasionally. If anyone asks personal questions, let me answer. Claire nodded slowly. And if I accidentally embarrass you? Something unexpected flickered briefly in Ethan's eyes then. Claire. His voice lowered slightly. You are not the embarrassing thing in my life right now. The sentence startled a soft laugh out of her before she could stop it. Ethan stared at her for half a second afterward, almost distracted by the sound. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Ethan extended his arm formally toward her. Ready? Claire looked at his arm nervously like it might explode. Not even remotely. To her surprise, Ethan's mouth twitched faintly again. Almost a smile. Good, he said quietly. That makes two of us. The elevator ride down to the underground garage felt strangely intimate despite the silence. Soft jazz music played overhead while mirrored walls reflected the two of them standing side by side. Claire kept catching her own reflection and feeling disconnected from it. Beside her, Ethan stood tall and perfectly composed in his tuxedo, hands folded loosely in front of him. He looked like he belonged on magazine covers. Claire suddenly felt painfully aware of how different their worlds really were. Why me? She asked softly before she could stop herself. Ethan glanced sideways at her reflection. You already asked that. And you gave me business reasons. Ethan looked forward again. Those are the safest kind. Claire frowned slightly at the answer, but before she could ask more, the elevator doors opened into a private garage lined with luxury cars. A sleek black Bentley waited nearby while a driver held the rear door open. Claire froze slightly. This car is bigger than my first apartment. Ethan looked amused for half a second. That sounds unsafe. Claire shook her head under her breath while climbing inside carefully. The leather seats were softer than her mattress at home. Home. The thought suddenly made her chest ache. She had not even gone back to her apartment today. Everything happened too fast. Her old life already felt far away somehow. As the car pulled onto Manhattan streets glowing with city lights, Claire watched rain streak gently across the windows. New York looked beautiful at night from inside expensive cars. Cleaner somehow. More cinematic. People hurried along sidewalks carrying umbrellas while yellow taxis flashed through intersections beneath towering buildings of glass and gold. Ethan sat beside her quietly scrolling through emails on his phone. Even in silence, he radiated pressure, responsibility, exhaustion. Claire studied him carefully while pretending to look out the window. "Do you ever stop working?" she asked. Ethan did not look up. "Not successfully." "That sounds miserable." "It is efficient." Claire smiled faintly. "You answer questions like a robot." That finally made him glance at her properly. "And you answer questions like someone who trusts people too easily." The words should have sounded insulting. Instead, they sounded almost protective. Claire looked away toward the rain again. "Maybe." Ethan watched her quietly for a moment before speaking again. "Do not let people at the gala intimidate you tonight." Claire let out a nervous laugh. "Easy for you to say. Half those people probably own islands. Most of them are deeply insecure. In tuxedos. The tuxedos help them hide it." Claire smiled despite herself. Somewhere during the drive, the fear inside her loosened slightly. Ethan was still intimidating, still unreadable. But occasionally, beneath the billionaire armor, she caught glimpses of dry humor and quiet loneliness that felt unexpectedly human. The Bentley finally slowed beneath the glowing entrance of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Flashing cameras exploded instantly outside the building. Reporters crowded behind velvet barricades while luxury cars lined the curb beneath massive golden chandeliers. Claire's breath caught. "Oh my God." Ethan looked toward the chaos calmly. "Stay close to me." Before she could respond, his hand moved gently against the small of her back for the first time. The warmth of that simple touch sent an unexpected rush through her chest. Then the car door opened, and suddenly the entire world was watching them. The moment Claire stepped out of the Bentley beside Ethan Calloway, the cameras exploded like fireworks across the hotel entrance. Bright flashes lit up the rain-polished sidewalk while reporters shouted questions over one another from behind velvet barriers. "Ethan, who is she? Is this your new fiancé? Did Vanessa Whitmore leave you for Damian Cross? Are wedding plans still happening?" Claire froze for half a second beneath the chaos. Her heart slammed painfully against her ribs as dozens of cameras turned toward her face at once. She had spent most of her life trying not to be noticed. Tonight, Manhattan suddenly could not stop staring. Ethan's hand remained steady against the small of her back. "Warm. Grounding. Keep walking," he murmured quietly beside her. Claire nodded stiffly, even though her knees felt weak inside the heels. The massive glass doors of the Whitmore Grand Hotel reflected gold chandeliers and polished marble floors inside, while elegantly dressed guests drifted beneath towering floral arrangements. Everything smelled faintly like champagne and expensive perfume. Claire felt like she had accidentally wandered into a movie set. A hostess greeted them instantly near the entrance. "Good evening, Mr. Calloway." Her professional smile brightened politely toward Claire. "Miss?" Claire opened her mouth, but Ethan answered first. "Bennett." The hostess's eyebrows lifted slightly in recognition. News spread fast among rich people. "Of course. Right this way." Claire followed Ethan through the ballroom, trying very hard not to trip over her own dress. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, while a live orchestra played soft jazz near the dance floor. Women in designer gowns laughed behind champagne glasses. Men in tuxedos discussed billion-dollar investments like normal conversation. Every surface in the room gleamed. Gold, marble, crystal. Wealth practically shimmered in the air itself. Claire suddenly became hyper-aware of everything about herself. The way she walked, the way she held her shoulders. The fact that 3 weeks ago she had been carrying coffee refills at Rosie's diner while worrying whether her debit card would decline again. "Relax your hands," Ethan murmured softly beside her. Claire looked down and realized she had clenched them into nervous fists. "Sorry. You are apologizing every 30 seconds. Because I feel like I am undercover." Ethan glanced sideways at her. "Technically, you are." Claire almost laughed before remembering cameras were still following them from across the ballroom. Ethan guided her toward a quieter corner near the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Rain streaked gently down the glass outside while the city glittered beneath the night sky. For one brief second, away from reporters and strangers, Claire finally breathed again. Then a tall, silver-haired man approached holding 2 champagne glasses. "Well," he said smoothly, "this is unexpected." Ethan's expression cooled immediately. Good evening, Richard. Richard Whitmore. Claire recognized him instantly from financial magazines. Vanessa's father. His expensive smile barely reached his eyes as he studied Claire carefully from head to toe. You certainly move fast, Ethan. Ethan accepted one champagne glass without reacting. Life moves fast. Richard handed the second glass toward Claire politely. And you are? Claire accepted the glass carefully. Claire Bennett. Oh. Richard nodded slowly. The mystery woman. Claire felt the subtle judgment hidden beneath the politeness instantly. Rich people insulted differently than everyone else. Softer voices. Sharper smiles. Claire works in hospitality. Ethan said calmly before Richard could continue. Really? Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly. How charming. Claire recognized the tone immediately. She had heard versions of it her entire life. People pretending kindness while quietly reminding you that you did not belong. Before she could respond, Ethan spoke again. She is smarter than most people in this room. Silence followed instantly. Richard's smile tightened almost invisibly. Claire blinked in surprise beside him. Ethan took a slow sip of champagne without looking remotely bothered by the tension he had just created. Finally, Richard chuckled softly. Well, this should make tonight interesting. He walked away smoothly into the crowd. Claire stared after him. Did he just insult me in billionaire language? Ethan's mouth twitched faintly again. Yes. That was exhausting. You handled it well. Claire looked at him carefully. You defended me. Ethan's expression turned unreadable again almost immediately. I defended the arrangement. Yet somehow the answer sounded less convincing than he probably intended. Before Claire could think further, movement near the ballroom entrance suddenly shifted the energy of the entire room. Conversations lowered subtly. Heads turned. Camera flashes intensified near the doorway again. Claire followed everyone's gaze automatically. Then her stomach dropped. Vanessa Whitmore entered the ballroom wearing a deep emerald gown that hugged her figure perfectly beneath diamond earrings that probably cost more than small houses. She was stunning in the sharp, intimidating way luxury magazine covers always seem to be. Elegant, untouchable, dangerous. Beside Claire, Ethan's entire posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Vanessa noticed them instantly across the ballroom. Her red lips curved into a beautiful smile that somehow felt colder than winter. Claire suddenly understood exactly why Ethan looked exhausted every time her name appeared. Vanessa approached slowly through the crowd like someone fully aware the room belonged to her. Guests subtly stepped aside as she passed. Confidence radiated from her effortlessly. When she finally stopped in front of them, her eyes moved first to Ethan, then to Claire. Well, Vanessa said smoothly, this is quick even for you. Ethan's expression remained calm. Good evening, Vanessa. Her gaze lingered on Claire's dress. Pretty choice. Claire forced a polite smile. Thank you. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. You look nervous. Claire inhaled slowly. I think that happens when 50 cameras are pointed at you. Vanessa laughed softly, though there was no warmth in it. You will get used to it if Ethan keeps you around long enough. The insult landed quietly but clearly. Claire felt heat rise beneath her skin instantly. Beside her, Ethan's voice turned colder. Enough. Vanessa finally looked back at him fully. Something sharp and complicated flickered briefly between them. History. Hurt. Pride. Relax, Vanessa said lightly. I am just curious. Her eyes slid toward Claire again. What exactly does a billionaire look for in a diner waitress? The ballroom suddenly felt very quiet around them. Claire's chest tightened painfully. There it was. The real humiliation beneath the designer's smiles. Ethan answered before Claire could force herself to speak. Kindness. Vanessa blinked once, clearly not expecting that answer. Ethan held her gaze steadily. You should try it sometime. For the first time since entering the ballroom, Vanessa's perfect composure cracked slightly. Only for a second, but Claire saw it. The orchestra continued playing softly nearby while tension wrapped tightly around the three of them. Finally, Vanessa smiled again, though colder this time. Careful, Ethan. Her voice lowered slightly. You always mistake temporary comfort for something real. Ethan did not answer. Vanessa looked at Claire one last time before turning gracefully toward the ballroom crowd again. Enjoy the evening, she said softly. Then she disappeared into the sea of expensive dresses and champagne glasses. Claire exhaled shakily the moment she left. Okay, she whispered. Your ex-fiancé is terrifying. Unexpectedly, Ethan let out another quiet laugh beneath his breath. Real this time. Claire looked at him in surprise while the city lights shimmered beyond the ballroom windows behind them. And for the first time all night, Ethan Calloway actually smiled. Claire stared at Ethan in complete shock for half a second after he smiled. The expression transformed him so dramatically it almost felt unfair. His entire face softened beneath the ballroom lights, the cold sharpness fading just enough to reveal the man underneath the billionaire reputation. Younger, warmer, human. Then almost immediately, the smile disappeared again like he regretted letting it happen at all. "Do not look so surprised," Ethan murmured quietly before taking another sip of champagne. Claire blinked. "I honestly thought your face might crack if you smiled too hard." To her surprise, that earned another faint laugh beneath his breath. The sound settled strangely warm inside her chest. Across the ballroom, conversation slowly resumed after Vanessa's dramatic entrance, though Claire still noticed people glancing toward them constantly. Some looked curious, others judgmental, a few openly confused. Claire understood why. Ethan Calloway dated women who appeared on magazine covers and charity campaigns, not waitresses from Brooklyn who still checked grocery prices before buying cereal. "You are thinking too loudly again," Ethan said calmly beside her. Claire frowned slightly. "What does that even mean?" "Your face changes when you are nervous." "That is horrifying information." "It is useful information." Claire shook her head softly while staring out at the rain sliding down the ballroom windows. Manhattan glittered below them in endless gold lights. Somewhere down there were subway stations and corner delis and tiny apartments with flickering heaters. Somewhere down there was her old life continuing without her while she stood beside one of the richest men in New York pretending to belong here. "I still cannot believe this is real," she admitted quietly. Ethan's gaze lingered on her profile for a second. "Neither can the press." Claire glanced toward him carefully. "Does this bother you?" "What?" Everyone's staring. Ethan looked around the ballroom once before answering. "You stop noticing after a while." Claire watched a photographer zoom in on them from across the room. "I do not think I ever could." Ethan studied her silently for a moment. Then unexpectedly, he reached toward her wrist gently. Claire froze instantly as his fingers brushed the diamond bracelet Olivia had fastened earlier. "You twisted the clasp," he murmured. His voice lowered slightly beneath the orchestra music. Carefully, Ethan adjusted the bracelet against her skin with surprisingly gentle hands. The touch lasted only seconds, but warmth rushed unexpectedly through Claire's chest anyway. When he looked up again, their faces were suddenly much closer than before. Claire's breath caught slightly. Ethan seemed to notice it too because his expression shifted almost imperceptibly before he stepped back again. "Better," he said quietly. Claire stared at him for half a second too long before forcing herself to look away. Dangerous. That was what this was becoming. Dangerous in the quietest possible way. Before either of them spoke again, a loud crash suddenly echoed nearby. Several guests gasped softly as a tray of champagne glasses shattered across the ballroom floor near one of the serving tables. A young waitress stood frozen in horror beside the mess, while an older man in an expensive tuxedo glared at her furiously. "Do you have any idea what these glasses cost?" he snapped loudly. The poor waitress looked barely older than 19. Her hands shook visibly as guests nearby stared with thinly disguised amusement. "I am so sorry, sir," she whispered. "It was an accident." Clearly. The man scoffed. "Maybe restaurants should stop hiring people who belong at truck stops." Claire stiffened instantly. The humiliation on the young waitress's face hit far too close to home. Without thinking, Claire handed Ethan her champagne glass and walked directly across the ballroom. Ethan watched her carefully, but did not stop her. The young waitress had already dropped to her knees trying to clean the broken glass with trembling hands when Claire reached her. "Hey," Claire said softly, kneeling beside her immediately. "Stop. You are going to cut yourself." The girl looked up with watery eyes. "I am so sorry. You do not need to apologize for gravity." Claire grabbed a nearby linen napkin and carefully moved the larger pieces aside. The older man still looked irritated. "This is exactly why standards matter." Claire looked up at him calmly. "Actually, sir, this is why floors get slippery when people spill champagne all night." Several nearby guests went silent. Ethan remained near the windows watching the scene closely, unreadable as always. The older man frowned. "Excuse me." Claire stood slowly from the floor. smoothing her dress carefully. She made a mistake. That does not make her less human than everyone else in this room. The ballroom quieted noticeably around them now. Claire suddenly realized people were listening. Cameras too. Wonderful. The older man's expression darkened slightly. And you are? Before Claire could answer, Ethan's calm voice appeared behind her. Someone you should apologize to. Silence fell instantly. Ethan stepped beside Claire with one hand casually in his pocket, though the temperature around him suddenly felt much colder. The older man blinked in surprise. Ethan, I did not realize. No. Ethan interrupted evenly. You did not. The man looked visibly uncomfortable now beneath the attention surrounding them. Claire glanced sideways at Ethan in surprise. Ethan rarely raised his voice, yet somehow he still managed to dominate entire rooms effortlessly. Finally, the older man muttered an awkward apology toward the waitress before walking away quickly into the crowd. The young waitress looked stunned. Thank you, she whispered shakily. Claire smiled softly. You are okay. Ethan quietly handed the girl a folded card from his jacket pocket. Ask for Olivia Calloway tomorrow morning, he said simply. She will arrange something better for you. The girl stared at the card with wide eyes. A job? Ethan shrugged slightly. If you want one. Tears immediately filled the waitress's eyes again. Claire looked at Ethan in complete surprise. The young waitress thanked them repeatedly before hurrying away toward the staff corridor, clutching the card like it might disappear. For several seconds afterward, Claire simply stared at Ethan beside her. You just hired her. Ethan picked up his champagne calmly again. She looked hard-working. You noticed that from one accident? Ethan glanced sideways at her. You noticed it too. Claire looked down briefly, smiling despite herself. Maybe. Around them, the tension inside the ballroom softened slightly after the incident. Yet Claire noticed something else now too. People were looking at her differently. Less like an outsider. More like someone unexpected. A woman near the dance floor even smiled warmly toward her. Ethan leaned slightly closer then, lowering his voice enough that only she could hear. You handled that well. Claire looked up at him carefully. So did you. Ethan's gaze lingered on her face for one long second. No, he said quietly. You did. Something in his tone made her heartbeat stumble again. Claire looked away quickly toward the orchestra while trying to steady herself. This was supposed to be a contract. Temporary. Controlled. Safe. But standing beside Ethan beneath the ballroom lights while rain fell across Manhattan outside, Claire suddenly realized the truly dangerous thing about lonely people was not how cold they seemed at first. It was how desperately warm they became once they finally let someone close enough to matter. The rest of the ballroom seemed to shift subtly after the incident with the waitress. Claire could feel it in the way people approached her now. Less dismissive. More curious. Women who had ignored her earlier suddenly smiled politely when they passed. Men who once looked confused by her presence now greeted Ethan with careful interest while openly studying Claire beside him. Somehow, in less than 10 minutes, she had gone from outsider to mystery. Ethan remained calm through all of it, untouchable as always. Yet every now and then Claire caught him glancing toward her with an expression she could not fully understand. Something thoughtful, something quieter than before. Near the orchestra stage, a television screen mounted above the ballroom suddenly flickered with breaking entertainment headlines. Guests nearby turned toward it instinctively. Claire followed their gaze and immediately froze. A photo of Ethan and Claire exiting the Bentley less than an hour ago filled the screen beneath bold white text. Who is Ethan Calloway's new woman? Another image appeared beside it. Vanessa Whitmore leaving a restaurant earlier that week holding hands with Damian Cross. The ballroom buzzed softly with whispers. Claire's stomach tightened. That was fast, she murmured. Ethan barely looked surprised. The internet works harder than most corporations. Claire stared at the screen uneasily. Her face looked strange beside Ethan's in photographs. Smaller somehow. Softer. Like she accidentally wandered into someone else's story. Do they always do this? She asked quietly. Yes. Ethan's answer came too quickly. Like he stopped questioning invasion years ago. Claire looked at him carefully. That sounds exhausting. It is profitable. Before she could respond, a tall brunette woman wearing a silver gown approached them carrying 2 champagne flutes. Unlike most guests tonight, her smile looked genuinely warm. Okay, she announced immediately, handing one glass toward Claire. I officially love you. Claire blinked in surprise. What? The woman nodded enthusiastically toward the area where the waitress incident happened earlier. Nobody has spoken to Gerald Monroe like that in 20 years. Ethan sighed quietly beside Claire. Harper, do not harper me, the woman replied smoothly. You disappear emotionally for 6 months, show up with a gorgeous mystery woman, and somehow expect people not to have questions. Claire glanced between them. Friend. Unfortunately, Ethan muttered. Harper grinned. Best friend. She extended her hand toward Claire. Harper Ellis. Claire shook it carefully. Claire Bennett. I know. Manhattan already knows. Claire groaned softly. Harper laughed warmly before lowering her voice slightly. For what it is worth, I think you are good for him already. Ethan looked unimpressed. Harper. What? She smiled innocently. You smiled twice tonight. That is basically a national holiday. Claire accidentally laughed. Ethan gave Harper a warning look that clearly had no effect whatsoever. Harper leaned slightly closer toward Claire conspiratorially. Last year he fired a man for describing hotel curtains as cheerful. They were terrible curtains, Ethan defended calmly. You see what I mean? Harper whispered dramatically. Claire smiled despite herself. For the first time tonight, the ballroom felt slightly less terrifying. Harper stayed with them for several minutes, casually rescuing Claire from awkward conversations and silently explaining which wealthy guests to avoid. That man near the bar cheats on all 3 wives, Harper whispered lightly at one point. And the woman beside him once sued her own sister over a yacht. Claire nearly choked on champagne. Rich people are terrifying. Rich people are bored, Harper corrected. Ethan quietly watched Claire laughing beside Harper with an unreadable expression on his face. Something in his chest tightened unexpectedly at the sound. He had spent years attending galas exactly like this one, yet somehow tonight felt entirely different. Warmer. Less empty. Claire noticed his silence eventually and looked toward him. You okay? Ethan blinked slightly, almost like he had been somewhere far away in his thoughts. Fine. Harper smirked knowingly. He is thinking. Claire frowned playfully. That sounds dangerous. Usually it is, Harper replied. Before Ethan could defend himself, movement near the ballroom entrance shifted attention again. Several reporters had somehow been allowed briefly inside the lower reception area, and camera flashes lit the hallway beyond the ballroom doors. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Harper sighed softly. And here comes the circus. Claire looked confused. What now? Ethan set down his champagne untouched. They're going to ask questions. Claire's stomach dropped again. Questions about us. Questions about you. Before she could respond further, a sharply dressed reporter approached carefully near the ballroom entrance, while hotel security lingered behind him impatiently. Mr. Calloway, the reporter called politely. Just one comment. Ethan's voice cooled immediately. No interviews tonight. The public is curious. The reporter continued smoothly. Especially after your engagement situation this week. Ethan stepped slightly in front of Claire instinctively. Then let them stay curious. The reporter's eyes shifted toward Claire anyway. Miss Bennett, how does it feel becoming Manhattan's newest obsession overnight? Claire froze slightly beneath the attention. Ethan glanced back toward her, silently giving her the option not to answer. But something stubborn inside Claire straightened instead. She looked directly at the reporter. Honestly, the man nodded eagerly. Claire smiled faintly. Confusing. A few nearby guests laughed softly. Even the reporter looked surprised. You were working as a waitress 3 days ago, he continued carefully. That is quite a transition. Claire nodded calmly. Yeah, I still cannot walk correctly in these shoes. More laughter rippled nearby. Ethan stared at her quietly then, something dangerously close to admiration flickering briefly in his eyes. The reporter smiled slightly. And what exactly attracted you to Mr. Calloway? The ballroom quieted again. Claire felt dozens of eyes watching her response. She glanced sideways toward Ethan for one brief second before answering honestly. He paid for my mother's surgery without asking for credit. Silence followed instantly. Even Ethan looked caught off guard. Claire continued softly before fear could stop her. Most powerful people want applause every time they do something decent. He did not. The reporter lowered his microphone slightly. Around them, guests exchanged surprised looks. Ethan remained completely still beside her. Claire suddenly worried she had crossed some invisible line. But then quietly, almost under his breath, Ethan said, Claire. She looked toward him nervously. Yet his expression held no anger. Only something deeper now. Something unsettled. Before the moment could stretch further, security finally escorted the reporter away politely. Harper looked between them both with visible amusement. "Oh, this is getting dangerous." Claire frowned. "What does that mean?" Harper only smiled mysteriously before drifting back toward the dance floor crowd. Silence settled briefly between Ethan and Claire afterward. The orchestra played softly nearby while rain continued streaking across the towering ballroom windows. Finally, Ethan spoke quietly. "You should not have said that." Claire's stomach sank. "Sorry, that is not what I meant." She looked up carefully. Ethan held her gaze steadily for a long moment. "Nobody has ever described me that way before." Claire's heartbeat slowed strangely beneath his attention. Maybe nobody noticed. Ethan stared at her beneath the chandelier light while the ballroom noise faded softly around them. Then his voice lowered almost to a whisper. "You noticed too much." The way he said it made warmth spread unexpectedly through her chest again. Dangerous. Definitely dangerous. And for the first time since signing the contract, Claire realized she was no longer afraid of pretending to fall for Ethan Calloway. She was starting to become terrified that eventually she might not be pretending at all. The ballroom felt different after that conversation. Softer somehow. Less like a performance and more like something dangerously close to real. Claire could feel it every time Ethan looked at her now. The distance between them had changed without either of them acknowledging it aloud. He still stood with perfect posture. Still answered business calls with cold precision. Still looked like a man built entirely from control and expensive suits. Yet beneath all of it, something had shifted. Claire noticed it in the little things. The way his hand always found the small of her back whenever crowds pressed too close. The way his eyes searched for her automatically whenever someone approached them. The way his voice softened almost imperceptibly every time he said her name. Somewhere between fake smiles and ballroom conversations, Ethan Calloway had started treating her less like an arrangement and more like someone he instinctively wanted near him. That realization terrified Claire more than the cameras ever could. Near midnight, the orchestra transitioned into slower music while couples drifted toward the dance floor beneath the crystal chandeliers. Rain continued falling softly beyond the towering windows, wrapping Manhattan in silver light. Claire watched elegantly dressed couples sway together while waiters carried trays of champagne through the crowd. "You look nervous again," Ethan said quietly beside her. Claire glanced toward the dance floor. "Please tell me you do not dance." Ethan looked almost offended. "I know how to dance." That was not my question. For half a second, his mouth twitched again. "Barely." Claire smiled despite herself. "Good. I would feel emotionally attacked if you were perfect at everything." Ethan studied her for a moment before extending his hand toward her calmly. "Claire." Her heartbeat instantly betrayed her. "What? Dance with me." She stared at his hand like it might explode. "In front of all these people?" "Yes." "Absolutely not. You signed a contract." Claire narrowed her eyes. "That feels manipulative. Efficient." She laughed softly under her breath while shaking her head. "You really are impossible." Ethan's gaze remained steady on hers. "Probably." Around them, guests continued moving elegantly across the ballroom floor while soft piano music echoed through the chandeliers. Claire looked down at his outstretched hand again. Strong fingers. Calm posture. A billionaire asking a waitress to dance like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her stomach fluttered nervously. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Finally, she placed her hand in his. Warmth spread instantly up her arm the moment his fingers closed gently around hers. Ethan guided her carefully onto the dance floor while cameras flashed discreetly from across the room. Claire immediately regretted every life decision she had ever made. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered nervously. Ethan's hand settled lightly against her waist. "Just follow me." Claire swallowed hard as they moved slowly beneath the chandelier lights. She became painfully aware of how close he suddenly was. The clean scent of cedarwood cologne. The warmth of his hand through the thin fabric of her dress. The steady calmness in his eyes every time she looked up accidentally. Her pulse stumbled again. "You are thinking too loudly," Ethan murmured softly. Claire let out a nervous laugh. "I cannot help it." "Try." "Easy for you to say. You look emotionally unavailable in every situation." To her surprise, Ethan actually laughed quietly. The sound vibrated warm and low between them. Several nearby guests glanced over immediately, visibly shocked to witness Ethan Calloway appearing human. Claire smiled automatically at the reaction. Then suddenly, without warning, her heel caught slightly against the edge of her dress. She stumbled forward with a startled breath. Ethan caught her instantly, one arm wrapped securely around her waist while the other steadied her hand against his chest. Time seemed to pause for one dangerous second beneath the orchestra music. Claire looked up instinctively. Ethan was already staring down at her. Close. Too close. His expression shifted subtly as his eyes moved across her face. Her lips. Her eyes. Claire's breath caught softly. Around them, the ballroom noise blurred strangely distant. She could hear only the music and her own heartbeat now. Ethan's hand remained firm against her waist. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Claire suddenly became terrifyingly aware of how easy it would be for him to kiss her right now, and even more terrifyingly aware that she might let him. Then a sharp voice sliced through the moment like broken glass. Well, this is unexpectedly convincing. Vanessa. Ethan's entire posture changed instantly. The warmth vanished from his expression almost immediately as he stepped slightly back from Claire. Vanessa approached slowly through the crowd, holding a champagne flute between perfectly manicured fingers. Her green gown shimmered beneath the ballroom lights while cold amusement flickered in her eyes. "You two almost look real," she said smoothly. Claire forced herself to breathe normally again. Ethan's voice cooled immediately. "What do you want, Vanessa?" Vanessa smiled faintly. "Relax. I came to congratulate you." Nobody believed that for even 1 second. Vanessa's gaze drifted slowly over Claire again. "You certainly adapt quickly." Claire lifted her chin slightly. "I learn fast." Vanessa smiled wider. Clearly, the tension between them tightened instantly beneath the music. Ethan stepped subtly closer beside Claire again. Protective. Vanessa noticed that too. Something sharp flickered briefly behind her eyes before disappearing beneath elegance again. "You know," Vanessa said lightly, swirling champagne in her glass, "Manhattan loves stories like this." Claire remained silent. Vanessa's smile sharpened slightly. "Poor girl meets billionaire. Cinderella in designer shoes." Ethan's jaw tightened visibly now. "Enough." Vanessa ignored him completely. Her eyes stayed fixed on Claire. "The problem with fairy tales," she continued softly, "is that eventually midnight comes." Claire felt the insult clearly this time. Around them, a few nearby guests had started listening openly again. Ethan's voice turned colder. "Vanessa." But Claire surprised herself by speaking first. Calmly. "Actually," she said quietly, "I think midnight is usually when rich people start making terrible decisions." Silence hit instantly. Then somewhere nearby, Harper Ellis nearly choked laughing into her champagne glass. Ethan stared at Claire in visible surprise. Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time all night. Only slightly, but enough. Claire held her gaze steadily despite her racing heartbeat. Years of being underestimated suddenly settled sharp and steady inside her spine. Vanessa tilted her head slowly. "Careful, Claire." Her voice lowered. "You are standing in a room full of people who can destroy lives with one phone call." Claire looked at her calmly. "Then maybe they should spend less time making phone calls and more time becoming decent human beings." Complete silence spread across the nearby ballroom crowd now. Ethan remained absolutely still beside her. Vanessa stared at Claire for several long seconds. Then unexpectedly, she laughed softly beneath her breath. Not warmly, not kindly, but genuinely amused. "Interesting," she murmured. Her gaze shifted briefly toward Ethan. "She is not temporary, is she?" Ethan did not answer immediately. That silence alone changed something dangerous in the air between all three of them. Vanessa noticed it too. Claire saw the exact moment realization flickered across her face. And suddenly, for the first time that night, Vanessa Whitmore stopped looking at Claire like a joke. For several long seconds after Vanessa's question, the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, while soft piano music drifted through the silence. Yet Claire could feel tension tightening across the room like invisible wire. Vanessa stood perfectly composed with her champagne glass balanced delicately between her fingers, but something colder now flickered behind her eyes. She had finally seen it. The dangerous thing neither Ethan nor Claire had admitted aloud yet. This arrangement was starting to blur into something neither of them fully controlled anymore. Ethan's expression remained unreadable beside Claire, though she noticed the slight tightening in his jaw again. He did that whenever emotions got too close to the surface. Vanessa studied him carefully, waiting, expecting him to deny it, to laugh, to dismiss Claire as temporary. Instead, Ethan calmly reached for Claire's hand. The movement was simple, quiet, yet somehow more intimate than kissing her in front of the entire ballroom would have been. Claire felt warmth spread instantly through her chest as his fingers intertwined naturally with hers. Not forced, not performative, natural. Vanessa noticed that too. Her expression hardened almost invisibly. Interesting, she repeated softly. Ethan finally spoke. The evening is over, Vanessa. Her gaze stayed fixed on him for another moment before shifting toward Claire one last time. Careful with him, she said quietly. He only looks calm when he is drowning. The words lingered strangely in the air after she walked away. Claire watched Vanessa disappear into the crowd while uneasiness settled softly inside her chest. Beside her, Ethan released a slow breath almost too quiet to hear. You okay? Claire asked carefully. Ethan looked toward the ballroom windows instead of answering immediately. Rain still streaked silver against the glass outside, while Manhattan glowed endlessly beneath the storm clouds. Finally, he said quietly, Vanessa likes winning. And losing you felt like losing? Ethan's mouth twitched humorlessly. No, his eyes remained fixed on the city. Losing control did. Claire studied him silently. Sometimes Ethan sounded less like a man discussing relationships and more like someone discussing war strategy. Yet underneath the coldness, she could still hear exhaustion there too. You really loved her once, did you not? She asked softly. Ethan went still beside her. The question lingered between them longer than expected. Finally, he answered honestly. I thought I did. Claire nodded slowly. That sounds complicated. It was efficient. She looked up at him. That is not the same thing. Ethan's eyes shifted toward her then. Something quieter moved beneath his expression. I know. Before Claire could respond, a voice interrupted nearby. Mr. Calloway. One of the hotel event coordinators approached nervously holding a tablet. The board members are requesting your presence in the private reception lounge. Ethan's expression cooled immediately back into business mode. Now, apparently it is urgent. Claire instantly felt tension return to him. He looked toward her briefly. Stay here. I will not be long. She nodded. Okay. Ethan hesitated for the smallest moment before his thumb brushed lightly once against the back of her hand. Then he disappeared through the ballroom crowd alongside the coordinator. Claire stood alone, near the windows, suddenly feeling colder without him beside her. Which was ridiculous. Dangerous and ridiculous. She exhaled softly while staring out at the rain-covered skyline. Her reflection shimmered faintly against the glass now. Cream-colored designer gown. Diamond bracelet. Hairstyled perfectly. She still looked like someone else entirely. You wear expensive beautifully. Claire turned to find Harper approaching again, carrying 2 fresh champagne glasses. I think these shoes are actively trying to kill me, Claire admitted. Harper laughed softly while handing her a drink. You are doing better than most women born into this world. Claire glanced toward the direction Ethan disappeared. He looked stressed. Harper's expression softened slightly. The board hates surprises. And I am the surprise. You are the human surprise. Harper leaned casually against the window beside her. For years, Ethan only dated women who made sense on paper. Claire frowned slightly, meaning perfect backgrounds, perfect education, perfect social circles. Harper smiled faintly. Perfect emotional distance. Claire looked down at her champagne quietly. And me? Harper studied her carefully. You make him look alive again. The sentence settled unexpectedly hard inside Claire's chest. Before she could respond, loud voices suddenly echoed faintly from the hallway leading toward the private reception lounge. Several nearby guests glanced over curiously. Harper sighed under her breath. That cannot be good. Claire instinctively looked toward the hallway, just as Ethan emerged alongside several older men in tuxedos. The atmosphere around them felt immediately tense. One silver-haired board member looked openly furious, while Ethan remained dangerously calm beside him. Claire noticed reporters nearby, already trying to drift closer discreetly. What is happening? She whispered. Harper's face tightened slightly. Probably damage control. One of the older men suddenly snapped loud enough for nearby guests to hear. You cannot seriously expect shareholders to trust this circus. The ballroom quieted instantly. Ethan's expression remained cold. Watch your tone. You replaced a respected fiancé with a waitress from Brooklyn in 48 hours. More silence spread across the ballroom now. Claire felt heat rise painfully beneath her skin. Harper cursed softly under her breath. Ethan's voice lowered dangerously. That is enough. But the board member continued anyway, too angry now to stop. The media already thinks this relationship is fake. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances nearby. Cameras subtly lifted again across the ballroom edges. Ethan remained perfectly still. Too still. The older man looked toward Claire dismissively. No offense, Miss Bennett, but this company cannot attach its future to someone completely unprepared for this world. The humiliation landed quietly but sharply. Claire felt every eye in the ballroom shift toward her again. Ethan's jaw tightened visibly. Harper stepped forward instantly. Maybe stop talking before you embarrass yourself further. But before anyone else could speak, Claire surprised herself by calmly setting down her champagne glass. Then she walked directly toward the furious board member. The ballroom watched silently. Claire stopped in front of him with her shoulders straight despite the panic hammering inside her chest. You are right, she said softly. Complete silence followed. Even Ethan looked caught off guard. Claire continued calmly. I am not from this world. Her voice remained steady now. I worked double shifts to help pay for my mother's treatments. I have worried about rent. I know what it feels like to choose between groceries and prescriptions. The ballroom remained completely still around her. Claire looked directly at the older man. But maybe companies need more people who understand real life instead of pretending money automatically makes someone wise. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Claire glanced briefly toward Ethan, then back again. And for what it is worth, she added quietly, Ethan Calloway has treated me with more respect in 3 days than some wealthy people manage in entire lifetimes. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then unexpectedly, applause echoed softly from somewhere near the back of the ballroom. One pair of hands. Then another. Harper smiled immediately. More guests slowly joined in. Even some reporters looked impressed. The older board member flushed visibly beneath the attention. Ethan stared at Claire like he had forgotten how to breathe for a second. Because nobody had ever stood beside him publicly like that before. Not for his money. Not for his power. For him. And somehow that terrified him far more than losing any business deal ever could.